So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for the kind invitation. And I'm sorry that I couldn't make it in person, but I'm still glad that I can present some of the work that we just finished. So it's not published, and it's about predatory and defensive venom uses in cone snails. And I added the cheeky phrase, "Who cares? Say the snakes." The reason being that I know that this Oxford meeting is full of you guys, snake venom experts. So I had to throw in some snake stuff. So you'll see at the end why I'm saying this. So let's start with some completely unrelated stuff. But please forgive me, I'm not an evolutionary biologist by any means. So excuse the very simplistic view, but I'm trying to convey some ideas. So if I look at the evolutionary success of a species, I'd like to reduce it to these two main factors. I know there's much more like reproduction and all that stuff, but let's keep it simple. So first, you have to avoid being food yourself, so being able to defend yourself. And of course, you have to find food, which is predation. And if I take our own species, so humans as an example, I think everybody would agree that our ability to make tools, especially weapons, was key to this evolutionary success. And these weapons, they were actually designed for very specific purposes. So if you want to take down a running deer, you will take this kind of tool. If you want to fish in the river, you will take different tools. And if you want to defend against a cave bear or a big cat, it will be a different tool. So now if we take this analogy and go back to our venomous animals, venom as a weapon, and the first use that comes to mind is always predation. So yes, it helps the animal catching its prey. And then the second use is usually defense. When we get bitten or stung by one of these animals, it's usually not because we are on the menu, but they're trying to defend against us. And you also have other uses that are minor. But I would argue that for some animals, like the stingrays, the honeybees, and this weird looking animal from Australia, the platypus, they use their venom exclusively defensively, not for precapture. But I couldn't find any single animal that uses its venom only for precapture. So you could make a case that defense should actually be maybe at least equally important as predation, or even more important than predation for venom evolution. And that brings me to this rather unexpected discovery that we made now more than 10 years ago, that some cone snails actually can use different weapons or different toxin, whether they want to catch their fish prey or they want to defend against any kind of threat. And this is Conus geographus here. And if you look at the trace at the bottom left, the blue one is the predatory venom. So you see a rather medium complexity venom. And if you look at the green trace, which is the defensive sting, you see a much more complex venom, which is full of paralytic toxin, very potent. And if you look at the figure on the right, you see that the overlap in composition of these two venoms is less than 50%. And that also translates into very different biological activity. So this is old story. So I'm not coming back to this, but I just want to show you where we are at like our understanding of defensive and predatory strategies, especially in the case of fish hunter species. So this is the phylogeny of these piscivorous species. So they are divided into 7 different clades. Although for a couple of them, we are not 100% sure that they are actually fish hunters. But for the gastridium, so the one where we find Conus geographus, we have good data for the defensive and predatory strategies. And this is true also for the Pionoconus, where we have Conus striatus, for instance, where we have data on the defensive and predatory venom. But for the other ones, except maybe for the Cheliconus, where we have data on the predatory venom, we have absolutely no idea of their strategy, whether they can actually also defend against predators. So I decided to focus on this Textilia clade, for which we have no idea yet. And this clade has about 10 different species, and they're very difficult to collect. So mostly because they live in very deep water or in remote places like the Marquesa Islands in French Polynesia, and that makes them very rare. So maybe the only species that is maybe not as difficult to find is Conus bullatus or Textilia bullatus. And thanks to a research grant that we had with the French Polynesia, we were actually able to collect about a dozen specimens of this species that we kept live in fish tanks in a facility in French Polynesia. And we fed them for over a few years, so we kept them for 2.5 years. And we had plenty of time to collect their venom. So like you just saw, so the venom that is injected into fish, so the predatory venom. And we also challenged the specimen with a defensive threat, and we were able to collect the defensive venom. And this is what I'm going to show you now. So on this slide, you see 3 different specimens from the left to the right, so B, C, and H. And on top, you have the blue trace, which is always the predatory venom. And at the bottom is the defensive sting for the same specimen. So there's 2 things you can see on this slide. So the first thing is for each specimen, if you compare them, the blue trace, they look very similar. And that is also true for the green trace between different specimens. They look very similar. And the second thing is that between a predatory and a defensive sting, they look very different. And that is more obvious when you actually overlay the traces of these 3 specimens. So you see the blue trace, they overlay very nicely. And the same is true for the 3 defensive stings. And now if we look in details into the composition of these venoms, so starting with the blue trace, which is less complex, you see that the last 2 peaks on the right of the chromatogram, they are proteins. So you have a 49 KD protein and a family of 24 KD proteins. And then you have 2 major peaks around 10 minutes. And each of these 2 major peaks, they have minor peaks as well. And you see that the difference between these minor peaks and the major ones are 16 Dalton. And for those of you that do mass spectrometry, is quite easy to identify the post-translational modification, especially in cone snails, very common. It's a hydroxyprotein. So we have 2 peptides and 2 variants each of hydroxyprotein. And then on the left, you have some minor components. On the right, you have the green trace, and first you can see that it's much more complex. And also the mass distribution is very different. So we don't see the big proteins, and most of the peptides are below 3,000 Dalton. And we also have some small molecules that you can see at the beginning of the chromatogram. So the distribution is plotted here on the panel A on the left side. So you see the green defensive venoms. They all cluster between 1 and 3,000 Dalton, as already mentioned. And for the predatory venom, is slightly shifted to the right, including the big proteins at the end. If you look at the panel B, you see that the overlap between the defensive venoms and the predatory venom is very small. It's way less than for the geography story. So we have 2 very different venoms with almost no overlap. So now on the right, you have fractionation of these 2 venoms on reverse phase HPLC. So you have the trace on top for the defensive venom and the predatory venom at the bottom. And we collected 1-minute fractions for these 2 venoms. And the dots that you see in green and blue are those fractions that were tested against sodium channel in a calcium imaging assay, a flipper assay, using veratridine as a control. And the gray zone is the fractions that are not active, and the yellow zone are the active ones. And you can clearly see that the defensive venom has way more active fractions, although the predatory venom also has a couple of active fractions. But what's interesting is that they have different elution times, and therefore they are most likely different peptides. So just to conclude on this cone snail story, we demonstrated that for the first time that the Textilia clade is also able to produce these two different kind of venoms in response to predatory or defensive stimulus. And the preliminary bioassay screening revealed distinct active toxins in both venoms. And of course, the next steps are to characterize these specific predatory and defensive toxins, including finding the targets in the prey and predators, elucidating the mode of action and their structure. So now the cheeky phrase, why did I put that in? Since we made that discovery, as I said, more than 10 years ago, I always wonder whether other animals were able to actually modulate their composition in response to different stimulus. And I know that Glenn King, that is here, was the first to actually show that in insect, the assassin bugs, they're actually able to do that. I think Ivan Undheim also showed that in centipedes, they kind of also do different things, whether this is a predatory bite or defensive bite. And Yehu Moran also with the cnidarian, he showed that the nematocyst in the tentacles and those in the body actually produce different toxins. So it seems that we are not alone, but I always wonder the snakes. Because let's be honest, all the venom studies that we've seen for the past, I don't know, 100 years, they all come from the same collection method, which is to hold the snake behind the neck and to force it to bite into a glass, and then you collect the venom. And I think you would agree that this is nowhere near a predatory bite, but it's clearly a defensive injection. And I was wondering if the predatory bite that is injected into a prey would be different. And I never found anybody crazy enough to give it a try, but I found them in Belgium with Aude Violet and Rudy Fourmi from this alpha biotoxin that you probably know, this company in Belgium. And they say, yep, sure, we're going to give it a go. So sounds like fun. So they made dissection of mouse, so dead mouse, I should say, that they used to feed their captive snakes. And they came up with these ideas of putting a grid into the skin of the mouse, or putting a hollow plastic tube into the skin, as you can see in these images. I think that was very clever, and they gave it a try. So here you see the elapid snake that were given this dummy mouse, and they bite into it, no worries. And I've been told by them, because I'm no snake expert, that they can really see that this is a predatory behavior, because they are used to being fed on certain times, and they could really tell that this was a predatory bite. So anyway, it worked. You can see on the right that we could collect substantial amount of the predatory bites. And then now I'm going to show you the results. So there we go. So we'll start with some viperid snakes. So you have the name there. I have no clue what they are, but you know them. And those 4 species of viperid snakes, you have 2 traces for each of them. So the top one is the predatory bite that I just showed you, and the bottom one is the normal behind the neck milking. So you can, I don't think it takes superhuman vision to see that, yeah, they're exactly the same. So there is no difference between the predatory and the defensive bite for those snakes. So very disappointing.
5 minutes, Sebastien.
Yeah, right on time. Easy. I'll show you the elapid snakes, because why not? So they had some cobras also in captivity. And again, you see top trace is the predatory bite. The bottom one is the defensive one. I don't see anything significant. So yeah, very disappointing. So here we go. The takeaway message is simple. Cone snails are way smarter than snakes. I'm sorry to break it to you. And with that, I just want to thank the people that work on this project, especially Zamina, who is the PhD student that worked on the Bulatus story, and in French Polynesia, Serge and Nicola, who helped with the collection of the snails, and my brother, who is actually the master in collecting the two different venoms from these cone snails, and the colleagues in Australia for the bioassay screening, and the crazy people in Belgium for doing this funny experiment with snakes. And with that, I have to thank you for your attention.